Hi, listeners. My name's Narinder Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Look Deep, and I want you to meet Amy.
Thanks, Narinder. I'm an AI assistant that can see. I was created by Look Deep, the first company to bring peer-reviewed computer vision into hospitals.
Amy watches for signs that a patient needs help, supports the care team, and makes sure no one ever feels alone in their care.
I'm sure you have questions. I'd love to answer them. Come talk with me at lookdeep.ai/Amy.
Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Hallie Tecco.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Krause. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Steve Krause, and I am super excited today to have two of my awesome colleagues from Bessemer Venture Partners on the pod. This idea came actually from my co-host, Hallie Tecco, who read Bessemer's State of AI 2025 report, which was co-authored by my guest today and my partner, Kent Bennett. And Hallie said, hey, a lot of this report is about other industries, but, we're doing a lot when it comes to AI and healthcare. So why don't you have Kent on to talk about the report? And I thought alongside Kent, I'd bring my awesome colleague, Sofia Guerra, who has led all our AI work in Bessemer and in the healthcare space, invested in a number of great companies. And she herself authored the Healthcare AI Adoption Index a few months ago. And so I wanted Kent and Sofia to come on and talk about all the learnings that we've had when it comes to the explosions that are happening as it relates to this technology, both across all the industries that Bessemer invests in, which Kent can focus on, and then as it relates to healthcare, which Sofia and I can talk about. So welcome, guys, to the Heart of Healthcare.
Hey. What a dream, lifelong dream to be here. I'm glad that somebody I don't know was the person to recommend that I join you after I sat next to you for, the last 25 years. But
yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So listeners, as you know, Kent and I, we've actually worked together for 25 years, although he did take a hiatus from working with me to become a creative executive in the entertainment industry out in Hollywood. So if he's funny on this podcast, you now know why, but I get the pleasure of working with him. All right, Kent, let's talk about the Bessemer State of AI 2025 report, which you co-authored along with a number of people at our firm. What do you think the most interesting insight from the report was in your mind?
I mean, it truly is a massive group effort, and many of us are looking at very specific domains. So there are a ton of insights from very kind of deep places.
All right, but you're a creative exec. You have to be punchy. Okay. What's your number one? So, give it to me.
Yeah, the Hollywood headline is that we are seeing just a new growth trajectory that you looked a little freakish a couple years ago, and maybe at that time could have been thought to be isolated to a few companies. And now it looks like just a consistent thing that we're seeing across the board. And this is, what we labeled as the supernovas and the shooting stars, which are these two new growth benchmarks that we're seeing in AI companies. The supernovas being just the holy crap, we've never seen anything like this growth curve. Companies that literally can go from standing start to 100 million of revenue in under 2 years, and in some cases under 1 year, which, that's pretty new to the earth. And it's more than just a few, but it's not 100 companies that would fit that profile. So it gets a lot of the headlines. For me, the even more interesting pattern are these shooting stars. And these are the companies that they're not the supernovas. They look in many ways what we would have thought of like the classic SaaS incredible companies, but they're growing meaningfully faster than their SaaS predecessors, even the home run SaaS predecessors. And so there was an acronym T2D3, meaning triple, double, double,
yep,
which was the old school SaaS growth pattern for the home run SaaS companies. And what we're seeing with these shooting stars is what we're calling Q2 T3, quadruple, triple. It hadn't been long enough to see if we'll really triple, but the quadruple, we're seeing that across a number of companies, probably over a dozen companies now, that we can say are off to the races at a much faster clip than even their best-in-class SaaS predecessors, and that's a pretty exciting pattern. So it's that's the Hollywood headline. It's all about growth. I think there's a lot more substance under the hood as to why that's happening, but that for us as we stood back and looked at some of these benchmarks was a big takeaway.
Yeah, I remember when you and I have been working at Bessemer for a long time, working together for a long time, as you noted. And I remember you invested in one of the greatest venture investments of all time, Toast, right? I remember Bessemer's done a lot in vertical SaaS, and there used to be this chart where we would brag about when companies get to $100 million of AR like within 7 years or 10 years. Now you're saying companies are getting there within 2 years.
2 years, and some very, very bizarre special companies in 2 years, but also a lot of companies appear to be on a 4-year trajectory to 100 million in revenue. And that curve is also bent, we think, driven in large part by this language model innovation. So that's a pretty wild development. It just means everything's going to be just a little bit faster, more competition, more speed to value. And we're seeing that play out. I want
to talk about some of the challenges here. But Sofia, I always remember I'd see these charts of Kent's companies and my other partners' companies getting to $100 million of ARR within 5 years and be like, well, that's never happening in healthcare because it's just like way too hard. And, you got all the HIPAA compliance and long sales cycles and lots of stakeholders. But we're actually seeing healthcare companies now that are quadruple, tripling. Why is now different in healthcare in your mind?
Yeah, we actually have we've copied a lot of the work that our great cloud colleagues have done in a lot of the benchmarking, both on healthcare SaaS and tech-enabled services. So you can compare it just on the software side as an example. We've seen that companies in the healthcare SaaS side had taken 4 or 5 years longer than traditional software businesses to scale. And a lot of that was because it's really hard to sell software in healthcare. Like changing behavior and adopting new products has been hard. But in healthcare AI, we've seen them. I published some of the data on our State of Health Tech last year to 10 million, Kent. So we haven't gotten the data on the 100 million, but they're scaling a lot faster than that. And I think it's because they're attacking different budgets in healthcare too. And they're going after a much larger TAMs, and the sales cycles are kind of compressing, Steve. So it's been really exciting to see our industry really match some of the benchmarks that we're seeing on the state of AI today.
Hey, Ken.
So I have a theory, Steve, if I can interrupt it.
Oh, you're gonna tell me about healthcare.
I'm gonna theorize.
I love this.
I'm gonna tell you about healthcare. Let me tell you a little something. No, this may not apply to healthcare. You tell me. But I have a theory that, historically there were some of these verticals, some of these industries that we would have described or people would have described as tech phobic. That like people in construction don't like technology, there was just this sort of like stereotype almost of the kind of an older person who was, scared of tech and didn't want to adopt it for various reasons. And I don't doubt in many verticals and certainly in healthcare, there were actual reasons to be, nervous about technology. But I actually think in some ways what slowed tech adoption for some of these verticals is that historically tech wasn't offering all that much. If you just showed up with a piece of software that was in the cloud and said, hey, we're going to take something that's in your back office and put it in the cloud. It
was like friction. What? You had to do more.
What do I get for that? You're going to make me do a lot of work for why? And what I think many of these industries had in common was just a ton of language, human language, and other sort of unstructured, blobby data, images, language, video, etc., in their workflows. That was just a big part of the value add. And so if you couldn't attack the language part and these, the big chunky parts of these workflows, you couldn't actually offer these verticals that much. Well, all of a sudden you can come along to these verticals, and I'll take healthcare as an example and say, wait, that thing you're doing every day, you're scheduling patient operations, you're, doing all these, reading through these documents and doing billing codes. We can actually take care of that now. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's really valuable. I actually am going to lean into that.
So Ken, I think it's a really interesting insight because, in most industries, like the largest piece of software is a system of record, right? And in healthcare is the same. I mean, Epic is the dominant piece of software. And frankly, the federal government gave doctors and health systems billions of dollars to adopt Epic, which, by the way, doesn't happen in other industries. And even still, doctors hate using it. For decades, they've hated using it. But all along comes these, to your point, large language models and companies like Abridge, our own portfolio company, right? And they actually make the process of inputting data into Epic much more pleasant for doctors because they capture this conversation that was never captured before. So I think it's a really interesting insight, and I agree with you that I used to call myself, my industry like Luddites. Previously to your point about technophobes, I always felt like a Luddite at Bessemer because we were always like a decade or two behind in terms of adopting technology. But now, because healthcare is so conversation rich and there's so much data, I actually feel like we're almost caught up to, or even caught up to every other industry in which we invest in healthcare, which is nice to see.
And maybe you were being a little unfair to healthcare. I mean, maybe it's like they were Luddites for a reason, because as they adopted that system of record, it created a lot of pain. And until, again, you had this sort of wave of technology that could deal with the language that's so inherent to the workflow there wasn't as much value as other industries like, say, restaurants, where, it's a lot more discrete actions, a lot less conversational workflow.
The other thing to add, Steve and Kent, is that on top of the EMR, which is the best system of record example in our industry in different verticals, is that there's a lot of work that gets done on top of that system of record that leverages some of that data, but then there's a lot of decisions that need to be made on top of that, either diagnoses or how to get paid and administer healthcare, that involves people. And we've only used people to do a lot of those because different companies or different health systems or payers will have processes that vary, that haven't been standardized. But with large language models, you can do that work and get paid for that work, which has enabled a lot of these companies to also capture a lot more value of what the things that they're doing versus just selling a piece of software for an individual to use and do that work themselves.
Right. Hey. There's a phrase that I don't know if it's hit healthcare yet, the systems of action versus the systems of record. Yeah. And, systems of action, this is a very classic VC. We come up with some kind of abstract, what does this actually mean phrase? Systems of action just means systems that do the work that humans used to do. That's what the action is, right? And that work is almost always just some language-based thing. And I think in so many industries, so much of that language is repetitive, very predictable, very appropriate for these language models. And then there's lots of other language and probably exceptions in all of those workflows that'll still be handled by humans. But that's where the action is coming.
I'm going to go home. Kent, you made me feel good. I'm going to go home and tell my kids that you think I'm tech savvy. So thank you for that.
I do.
Hey,
I
want to very hip. I want to ask you a question. You did a good job of talking about supernovas versus shooting stars. And one of the things that's really scary about this time is that, in any single category, there can be a couple supernovas or there can be 4 or 5 shooting stars. And it's very easy now. I mean, easy. It's hard to be an entrepreneur, to be clear, and it's hard to build a company. But it's easier to spin up software and to get folks who are seeking value to adopt your technology. How do you differentiate in these times? I mean, I see this in healthcare. There are lots of companies that are going after voice in healthcare, and there's even multiple companies going after the scribing space. How do you, as an investor, figure out signal from noise when it seems like everything's up and to the right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people are saying more often these days that the barriers to entry are lower in these spaces than ever before. I actually don't agree. I think that the barriers have always been very low, that writing software has always been basically you have a keyboard and you can do it. It's just that the speed is faster and some of these ideas are much more obvious. The ChatGPT moment was this giant floodlight turned on, and at that moment, 3 years ago in the fall when that launched, I guarantee you thousands of people who were in the healthcare system and knew something about technology thought, wait a minute, I could do something about this. So everybody had the idea at once. And if the only barrier was, writing software, the barrier was pretty low. But human beings, doctors, various customers, they don't want to constantly be reevaluating dozens and dozens of identical systems. So there will still be a prize to be had for the first few companies that get to market. Now, there may be battles within those first few about who has the absolute best product and establishes that they are the true leader. There's obviously other barriers you can build in that race, like distribution advantages and access to the underlying systems of record and all that. But we're not going to see a million copycat followers doing the exact same thing. At some point, the technology will deliver on the promise and it'll be good enough, and you won't have 50 competitors following.
One thing I wanted to add, Kent, is it all about execution then in the early years for these companies? Or how do you, there's a big difference we're seeing with systems of record. Software inherently is very sticky, particularly in a vertical, if you've implemented an EHR as an example. How easy is it to switch, and what are you seeing companies outside of healthcare that healthcare can learn, and how to build that stickiness as they scale?
Yeah, I think these are all kind of snowflake situations. So it just depends on the vertical, but execution in the sense that, there's some best version of a product that the universe only knows about at first. And, it's a race to get to that best version. And I think that's a key part of the execution. And then there's the execution around the go-to-market. So there's also some set of approaches, often sort of gimmicky, trick-like approaches to be able to deploy a technology to the market quickly. And that could be the way you price it, the way you demonstrate it, the way you actually sell it, the distribution agreements you get. And so those two dimensions of execution, both around product and go-to-market, are key. And once somebody locks in on sort of the best version of both, then it's a little bit too late for anybody to catch up with them. Because how do you get ahead of the leader if all you can do is show up with an identical product? And so I think that's certainly the race. If I had to pick between the two, whether it's like focus on like getting to the ideal product or the best distribution go-to-market, I think it's absolutely about product. I think we're in an era where information is just so easily accessible that once somebody shows up with an incredible product that's clearly, differentiated from the second or third best, that will become known pretty quickly and give you a really strong edge as that product leader.
It's interesting you say. I've always said in healthcare that best product doesn't always win. Maybe this time is different, by the way. But like the distribution has been key. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the industries that you focus on and then versus healthcare. Hey, I want to... In your report, you talk about these new growth benchmarks, which I thought were really interesting, I think relevant for healthcare, as we talked about. And then you go through some of the roadmaps that Bessemer covers. I don't want to go into all of them because I'm not sure all of them are relevant, but some are. And so let's stick with this idea of this system of record. And while we're talking about competition, the one thing which is kind of scary for me, it's not just that there's lots of venture dollars funding lots of great entrepreneurs and new startups. It's actually that the incumbents, the systems of records themselves, before they might have been more technophobic or at least not build the best product, right? But now they have systems, they have access to this world-changing technology that you just said is pretty easy to use. Like, how scary are those folks? And how do you think about that debate of who wins? Because before it was like, oh yeah, Toast is going to beat, NCR, if that's going to happen, right? And then it's a huge market. But now it's like, will Epic actually win? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's, again, it's going to be situational and very vertical by vertical. I think that the incumbents are in an incredibly strong position to at least have a strong competitive option to any system of action that sort of is built on top of one of the incumbent systems of record. But in some industries, they'll just be too sleepy and too crappy and too kludgy and have too much, historical tech debt to actually deliver on a product that's as good as a focused team that's like, doing nothing but trying to just crush that new applications that's built on top. And in those worlds, it'll be very hard, I think, for the incumbents to block access to that new product or to play like a real hardball game. And so if they're just competing on the field of product, I think in some cases they'll lose, but they certainly have every ability to go compete. I think it'll be more organizational and just sort of cultural on some of the incumbents' parts of whether they can show up in a big way. In the cases of like really agile with really strong talent, I think they will be able to show up with competing offerings to some of these systems of action that are built on top of the incumbents, and in some cases totally own these markets and do things like bundle their pricing or have deeper integrations offered for systems of action that they've built in-house that could give them, strong and even some would argue unfair advantages.
Sofia, you've referred to this as like the octopus strategy within healthcare, at least, where you start with a wedge use case. You actually talk about it in your report, Kent, and then you sort of try to attack the system of record and ultimately disentangle it, if you will, to use the octopus analogy or overuse it. Where in healthcare do you think this most likely will be successful in your mind?
Yeah, I'm really fired up about this because historically we've seen kind of point solutions that stagnate $25 million in ARR and can't expand from there. I do think that builder beware on the system of record that they're wrapping. So who are you on top of, and then where are you getting data? because there's a really big difference between building a feature on top of a system of record versus acquiring data from a system of record plus another system and then doing an action on top of that that requires a lot of intelligence and process expertise that I think net new companies and the innovators can really leverage to provide a value to a customer that a system of record won't do just themselves with what they already have. That's one where I think is going to be valuable. So picking the right wedge and kind of this hair on fire problem that sits in between multiple data sets in multiple places and you can have integrations into all of them is important. I think it's also important to think about what's the type of incumbent. I think Kent mentioned this, like some incumbents are better positioned than others, and potentially Epic does have a lot of resources and will fight a good fight here versus other smaller verticals that may be more attractive because these are sleepy, clunky incumbents.
You're talking about like maybe vertical software, like focused on different
other
ologies.
EMRs in other industries.
Yeah.
I mean, we've made a few investments in kind of the home care as an example, or home health and others that could be good examples here. But yes, just be aware of the system of record that you're wrapping and how focused are they here. And then how do you separate and bring data sets and process knowledge that doesn't only sit in the system of record? Because obviously, if it only sits on that system, they're better positioned to leverage it and block you out.
Yeah, I think what the conversation that is happening within every system of action company, it starts off with, well, gosh, we're building a really cool piece of software. People really love our software. They kind of generally don't love the system of record as much because it's usually older and dustier and all that kind of stuff. Maybe we should build one. And then they start to look at it and they think, wow, crap, that's a lot of work. We don't really want to build it. And hopefully we won't have to. And we'll just play nice, on the surface level and, still deliver the value and have our customers really like us. But over time, someday we may have to build it, because if the underlying system of record just decides to go to war with us and launch a competing product, our only option may be to fight back and have our own system of record replacement. And we're probably in a position to build a more agile version of a replacement with many better tools at our disposal to help with integrations and migration. But boy, we don't want to. We would so much rather not fight the underlying system of record, because replacing an underlying system of record, there's just no upside to the customer from that typically.
Right.
Maybe there's a little bit of friction reduction, but really all the value is being created on the surface. So I think in vertical by vertical, and you know your vertical better than I do, I think the systems of action will want to play really nice with the underlying system of record and hope they don't have to get to war. And a few of them who are hyper talented will be preparing a secret, system of record replacement in a glass jar somewhere in the back office that they hope to never have to break out and use, but they'll be ready to do so. And there may be in some verticals like massive battles for the underlying system record, and in other verticals you may get these more stable ecosystems where you don't get those huge wars.
What year, Ken, do you think we see actually, regardless of industry, that we see a system of record replaced? What's the time horizon this year, mind?
Oh, in some verticals, it's happening already. In some verticals, the underlying systems of record are so antiquated, sleepy, and crummy that actually there's enough pain to drive system of record replacements. But I would say, in the next decade, I would be surprised if most verticals don't see some sort of battle for a system of record replacement, because eventually strong systems of action will become the only interface points for the practitioners in a vertical. And all of a sudden, when you are never interacting with the underlying system of record because you're always being mediated through a system of action that is sort of doing the end workflow, then you're as the system of action, you get a lot of power and you think, why are we even dealing with this underlying antiquated system of record? Let's replace it. So I think eventually that becomes inevitable.
It's going to be fascinating to see that play out. Hey, I want to shift to two more roadmaps, one of which you focused on, still do a little bit, did earlier in your career, which is a consumer space. And you guys talk in the report about consumer AI. And I want to talk about healthcare in specific. I guess my question is, there's ChatGPT and then there's a perplexity, right, on search. I want to talk about search. Healthcare search is a huge amount of spend and eyeballs. And so the sort of question for you, and get your perspective outside looking in, does a ChatGPT win, or does an open evidence, which is like a healthcare search, or there are a bunch of companies that are being built on sort of, more healthcare search. Open evidence is more for doctors. But does a general LLM model win here, or does a vertically specific sort of built company win in the consumer eyeball race for, let's just call it healthcare search.
Yeah, I think I have no doubt that ChatGPT and Perplexity are two of the most widely used doctors in the world right now. And I think that's only going to increase. I think the consumers are lazy is a negative way to put it, but the consumers, like, they're busy.
Yeah.
They don't have time to go seek out open evidence. If we took a poll, I'm sure recognition of open evidence is zero right now. I know it's more for doctors, but no, the consumer will start with ChatGPT. Now, if they are offered something more valuable and more useful for them, I think they have a lot of potential to adopt it. I think that it's unlikely that a digital-only consumer product will overtake ChatGPT for, standard medical use cases. Maybe for like specific patients who are trying to do some medical adherence or some, therapy type, regimen, they would use something like that. But for my daily, I wake up with a cold, I'm going to go to ChatGPT. Now, I think what's really interesting is to think about coupling these language models with home health devices. And so we've talked for a long time about home health devices. I have like a smart scale in my bathroom. What does it do? It weighs me and it tells my phone how much I weigh, right? It's not that smart.
You were an early adopter of fitness tracking and all types of devices.
I tried many smart devices
Yes.
that weren't that smart, but
Yes.
now they can actually be smart. So I can finally imagine there could be something in my home can both give me a ton of passive monitoring of my health and actually coupling like language and some level of reasoning and diagnosis and access to medical expertise with that, with potentially also a promise of more privacy, because you could imagine a device that's deployed in my home could be specific to my health and ensure me that some information is going to be kept locally to those who care about that. I think many consumers actually don't really care all that much, truthfully, about privacy. But I think many consumers aren't going to submit their most private healthcare information to a ChatGPT if they had an alternative at home that was that knew them, knew all their history, had the full context of their medical history. So I could see that happening. But absent like a killer home device showing up that has a really strong value proposition, I would bet on the generic ChatGPT and Perplexities being the go-to doctors of the future for most consumers as at least a first step. And again, once you get a diagnosis of cancer or something like that, and your doctor may send you to a digital portal, there would be more advantage. But before that, I think I'm just going to start with Google in the old days and ChatGPT and Perplexity in the new days.
Sophia, you agree?
I definitely agree. I think that there's two buckets. One is on the physician side, Steve, because you brought open evidence. And I do think that physicians do have a higher bar for clinical evidence and the data that a lot of these models are spitting out. So they've kind of really built the trust with the clinician side. On the consumer patient side, definitely agree with you, Kent, that I am perplexing or the same as I would Google any medical question of something I have. But I do agree with you that wearables and a lot of this longitudinal data that can give you an insight into your health, particularly, if you're a healthy individual and are very interested in longevity and health span as an example, could be great. I have an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch, but what do you do with all of this? And who will develop this health coach is a big question. Would it be a net new company? Is it a company that already exists that has access to this data today? And I like the idea of home care and passive monitoring. But then there's another bucket of folks that do have a medical condition, a chronic condition, an illness. And how do you track a bunch of these symptoms over time? Perhaps your condition is not diagnosed. And how do you bring all of this data to your doctor without creating more noise, right? How do you derive signal from the noise? And I think Gen AI is going to be really great at doing that and helping get to the diagnosis faster and tracking a lot of these outcomes over time.
Well, it's interesting. ChatGPT actually just made some big hires in healthcare, both former product manager Instagram, but also the co-founder of Doximity, which is one of the most successful healthcare IT companies of the last decade. So they are making a move, to your point, Kent, of owning that space. And I'll never forget, our partner Byron Dieter said, the first screen of your iPhone is the most valuable real estate in the world, more valuable than New York or Beverly Hills or what have you. So I think whoever owns that in terms of healthcare, it's going to be a lot of money made there.
It's a good place to start. And by the way, I think the healthcare industry also, one of the great uses of ChatGPT in healthcare is you get some information back from your healthcare provider. You get some form that says, blah, 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 blah. What the hell does this mean? And I've done this, and I'm sure many consumers, you copy paste that into Perplexity and say, what the hell does this mean? And actually explain it to me like I didn't go to med school, because I did not. And guess what? It tells you exactly. Well, it tells you something, and I believe it, right? And so I think if the healthcare industry doesn't close that last mile to the patient, the average patient who, like me, doesn't, understand the 19-syllable words, then they're going to do it themselves with these tools.
Quick thing to add there too is I think ChatGPT is really great at giving you an answer. So you have to ask the right question. But something that our medical community, doctors, clinicians, nurses are great at is getting information from the patient by asking questions. And we haven't yet seen those models do that, right? Of like, how do you prompt a patient and ask a lot of questions to gather symptoms and get to a conclusion? So I'm excited to potentially see companies that are doing that can help speed up the diagnosis process and the data acquisition process versus the patient feeding the information or asking questions to a model.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. But like for consumers, unless a use case is very frequent, they don't save space in their brain for it. And so if I'm only sick once a year, I'm going to go to ChatGPT. Now, again, if I'm a chronic suffering patient, that's totally right. But so my bet is these wide engines will have opportunities to do that unless somebody gets even deeper into the distribution and does passive collection, on your phone and your smart health devices or in your home.
Hey, Kent, the last sort of roadmap that I want to talk about, or at least sort of new technology that I remember I first heard about this at one of our offsites, and it just blew my mind. This idea of model context protocol and what it might do for lots of different parts of the American economy, of how we interact with companies, with how companies interact with one another, how we do work. Can you explain for folks this concept of model context protocol? Because it's relatively new. I think it's really important to the system of action and agentic use cases. So I'd love for you to give like a one-on-one on what this is, because it blew my mind, and also give an example from one of the industries you work in and how this is being used by companies and how it's changing the way we interact.
Well, it's still extremely early for MCP, or Model Context Protocol. And so we're not seeing like massive examples that would be relevant yet. But what it is, like very simply, is a way to think about adding a layer to a website that would allow models to take action on that website, to collect data, and in some cases to do things on that web portal. And so that just opens a trillion possibilities for these core foundation models to and other companies that build off of them to start doing more things. So relevant to healthcare, I think that just means like the opportunity for more services to go to places to gather more information. They may be relevant to your healthcare, or to order you products that may be relevant to your health, or possibly to access some of your records. Although we both know that's going to be really thorny and not an easy one for the underlying record holders to give up. And so just think of it like for most consumers or even professionals in industries, it just means these models are going to get much more agile at being able to access the entire internet and do things with it.
And do industries like healthcare or others need MCP to be more mature in order for there truly to be agentic systems of action? Because the internet is such a big source of information and frankly interactions that happen between businesses. Is that key to actually truly making things agentic or not?
Yeah, I think the incentives will be aligned, right? The sort of websites that want the healthcare industry or any industry to be able to sort of access them and use them are going to then become more accessible because of MCP. Again, I think it is what's not mature is that it hasn't been like widely rolled out onto all sites, and the foundation models themselves have not been made easily to access sites using this stuff. So like that's just going to come, but it's not it's coming.
Is this going to be a battle which you'll remember where you have open and closed, systems? And Apple, for instance, for a while was like closed gated, right? Epic historically has been closed gated, although they've been forced to open up. Is this going to happen in this MCP world where it's like I could see some companies that have a Google, right, have a huge domain and make a lot of money off their domain, not wanting this to exist? Like, how is this going to play out?
Right. Well, I think it's just going to again vary by. If you have a property on the web, it just depends on what your business model is. If your business model is currently providing content and monetizing through advertising, then you're unlikely to let some other model come in, grab all your content and do something with it offsite without you wanting to charge some sort of tax. On the other hand, if your model is selling shoes and some other product shows up that wants to purchase shoes on your website, you'd be happy to let them do it. And so I think domain by domain, it's just going to be all about the incentives of the sort of like the property holders, the holders of the websites, like what is their business? What are they there for? What do they want? Do they have like a nonprofit business, or they just want to disseminate information of some kind? They'll be happy to let it go off site. Are they selling something? They'll be happy to let those transactions happen. Or do they have proprietary content that they're really going to want to protect? Although maybe at their peril, because if they have a competitor who strikes some low-cost deal to distribute their content through the models, then all of a sudden they may be forced to play ball. So it's a multi-variable chess game that we're just going to start to see play out in the coming years, and how it affects healthcare specifically, I have no idea.
Well,
what do you think, Sophia?
I'll take a stab at that. I think that a word that you said is so important for healthcare, which is incentive. Right. And that it always drives anything that we do in healthcare, because there are different stakeholders, say the payer and provider, that have very different incentives. So we may see the MCP kind of open up some of these systems of record and information. But similarly to the struggle, Steve, on API adoption, although we've made great strides in healthcare, I think that it's going to lag unless the incentives are aligned, Kent, to your point. But perhaps maybe voice and conversations and voice AI takes a space where you can gather information, because that's how communications are done in healthcare today, right? There's a lot of places where there's no APIs, but you have to call your payer and get information, and perhaps you can automate that. So maybe voice AI becomes the new way data gets shared in certain parts of healthcare, potentially where these incentives are not aligned. We don't know.
All right, I want to move to some of the predictions. We're not going to go through all of them. I think there are 5. I want to actually pick my favorite if I take the moderator's prerogative. And it's number 3. We'll share, obviously, the State of AI 2025 on the show notes. But number 3 is evals and data lineage will become a critical catalyst for AI product development. And this really struck with me, chord with me, because obviously data and security and sort of lineage in healthcare is really important given the stakes at hand. But can you talk a little bit about what you meant by this in this report, what you're seeing being done in other industries that healthcare may want to know about or copy, or maybe healthcare's already way ahead of this?
No, I think everybody's just getting started on this one. I mean, what this means is historically with software, testing software was always a bit of a pain, but at least you could run a test and see an outcome and rely on that being the outcome of the test. Meaning, okay, I clicked this button. Did that work? Did that do the thing I wanted that button to do? Check, no check, right? AI and these foundation models are different, right? You're asking them to generate text output. It's not the same every time. It's in many ways, it's more of an analog output as opposed to discrete digital output. And so how do you test that? You build an application that's supposed to give medical advice. How do we know if it gives the right advice the 1,000 times that we try it with slightly different wording? And so these new systems are arising to be able to create these test environments for these applications that involve these language models to figure out like how good do we feel about the outputs. And they just have to inherently understand that the outputs are going to be a little bit more, again, analog, a little bit more organic in a way than historical, discrete software output. But that's critical. So like if I'm going to build an app and I need to know if it works, like I need to be able to test it. I can't just throw it in the world and then figure out if it's giving faulty advice to somebody, down the line.
Yeah, I had Brian Anderson, who heads up the Coalition for Health AI, and this is one of the things they're main focused on. This actually strikes me as one of the most sticky wickets when it comes to AI being adopted in healthcare, because the word organic is not necessarily something that feels
variable,
comfortable,
right?
Or variable, right?
No, and especially when the outcomes are health related, like one long tail bad piece of advice could kill somebody. And so I think that obviously healthcare is going to be one of the last industries to accept any margin for error in sort of their application outcomes.
Do you think this is a place where, you mentioned a couple companies in the report that are doing this broadly, but do you think this is a place where there might be actually healthcare specific testing companies?
Absolutely. I think that it wouldn't shock me at all if the same environment testing application that works for some consumer e-commerce is not appropriate for healthcare because of this sort of long tail issue. And I don't know. I think we'll have to see, but it wouldn't surprise me if a domain specific company like this rose up. Now, it's a slice of a market if it's going healthcare only.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of a market size question, but it would make sense to me that you might have a trusted provider that focuses only on healthcare, or at least that one of these providers launches sort of a healthcare specific vertical where every single piece of advice gets to be measured against physician, recommended outcomes, et cetera.
All right. Well, I said Kent is creative. I started with that. He's a great investor too, a great friend, great colleague. But I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Ken, and then end with you, Sofia. If we come back next year, Healthcare AI Adoption Index 2026 has been written, the State of AI 2026 has been written. What's the one product, Kent, that you want to see built for your use case or for your interest in the healthcare AI space?
Yeah, my bet is it's a little more than a year away.
Okay.
But I do want the actual smart scale. I want something in my home that takes all of the data that I'm putting off, both from all these silly devices that we're wearing, etc., but also just passive collection of like, how does my voice sound in the morning? What do I look like in the mirror, etc., and just kind of is watching me. Like, I want a smart doctor in my house to watch me for the next 50 years as I age and try to be a very healthy, parent and eventually grandparent for lots of kids and grandkids, hopefully. So I'm dying for that to show up. And by the way, I think there's like a health version of that. I think there's also a passive home assistant that's like a little bit more invasive than an Alexa that actually is listening to us at all times.
Like, you may want
homes
pasta tonight because you had chicken last night or something like that is what you're pointing
Yeah,
at.
just occasion. Or the one I like, this is pure consumer, not necessarily health, although it's, I think, good to add a lot to our lives. Like, help me remember the stuff that I forget all the time. Help me remember the really cute thing that my 4-year-old says when she's 8. Help me remember that my wife said, we're busy on Saturday, so I don't accept other plans. Like, I'm just dying for more passive language model assistants to be part of our lives. And I think health is a huge part of that.
Awesome. Sofia?
I'll follow on that because the consumer health use case is very exciting, and I'll kind of focus again what I said on can an LLM or an AI help you gather data and do the triaging on diagnosis potentially on behalf of doctors to gather a lot of this data, symptoms, to get to a diagnosis and help with that process. And it could either be full consumer distribution business versus triage for providers, but it'll be exciting to start to see how AI is being used in the clinical diagnosis setting. And obviously, I don't know if that will happen in a year, Steve, but I'm excited about that opportunity.
Well, thank you to you both. One of the best things I love about my job is I get to work with really smart people who, in a very cool, rapidly changing surface that we get to explore with entrepreneurs and focused on innovation. And I thought today was just great, exploring all the things that are happening in this wild, wild new world, which is just so exhilarating. So thanks, Kent, for sharing an outside-in perspective and sharing what's going on in the rest of the world when it comes to AI. And thanks, Sofia, always for adding some color as it relates to healthcare. I appreciate you both for coming on.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Hallie Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Krause, and Hallie Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
Wherever you go, whatever they get into. From chill time to everyday adventures, protect your dog from parasites with Credelio Quattro. For full safety information, side effects, and warnings, visit CredeliaQuattroLabel.com. Consult your vet or call 1-888-545-5973. Ask your vet for Credelio Quattro and visit QuattroDog.com.